Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how you doing today?
I am doing fantastic. I hope everyone out there who's listening, I hope they're doing fantastic. And Tim, I hope you're doing fantastic. How are you?
Well, thank you so much, Lance. I am doing great. It's a new year. We're in 2022. We're going to be talking about going to CrimeCon in a little bit. But Lance, this episode, it's a great one. We have on two authors, David Bushman and Mark T. Givens. They wrote a book called Murder at Teal's Pond, Hazel Drew and the Mystery That Inspired Twin Peaks. Lance, I know you're a huge Twin Peaks fan, so tell me about this book.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure talking with these two gentlemen, and while they are both Twin Peaks fans, and the foreword is written by Mark Frost, the co-creator of Twin Peaks, the book itself asks the question, who killed Hazel Drew and why? And that brutal murder took place in 1908 in a small town called Sand Lake, New York, and David and Mark do an outstanding job recreating the crime, that time period, and the region with its questionable politics and its truly eccentric characters. It's further impressive to me that this is the first true crime book either of them has written, and after 5 years of researching the murder, the result is a page turner that I cannot recommend enough. You can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and you won't be disappointed. I guarantee it.
Great. And the audiobook is available as well on Audible. And this is a new book. Came out in December of 2021. You did a great job with this interview, Lance. I was not a part of it. So this is, I think, the first one that you've handled completely on your own on Crawlspace. And you did a great job. Fascinating case. Excellent book. Make sure to check it out.
And Tim, you mentioned CrimeCon at the beginning of this, and we will be there. And if any listeners out there on the fence about whether or not to go, maybe this will be the deciding factor for you. You can use code Crawlspace for a 10% discount off of your standard badge at crimecon.com. That's promo code Crawlspace for 10% off your standard badge, and we really, really want to see you there.
All right, everybody, thanks a lot for listening. Please follow us on social media at Crawlspace Podcast or Crawlspace Pod on Twitter.
And welcome to the show, David Bushman and Mark T. Givens. You two are the authors of a phenomenal true crime book called Murder at Teal's Pond. I just finished it. It's amazing. There's so much to talk about here. One is the actual crime that took place, the murder of Hazel Drew. The other is the inspiration for this book and your backstories as well. But just wanted to introduce you, David and Mark. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having us, and thanks for the kind words about the book.
Ditto. Thank you so much, Lance. Great to be on the show.
I mean, the kind words are deserved because it's good. It's a great book. We do a lot of shows that every one of our shows, for the most part, it has to do with some sort of true crime event, something that is unsolved or mysterious. And this is the epitome of that. The cast of characters that are involved in Hazel Drew's murder, the politics, the conspiracies, the theories, the speculation, it folds over into itself over and over again, and it's riveting. But if you each could give a little bit of backstory on yourselves, and then we could get into the inspiration for this.
Yes, so I think we were talking a little bit before we actually got on the air, and all three of us are long-term Twin Peaks fans. So that was both David and my entry into the story. A few years back, they were getting ready to... They announced they were coming out with a third season of Twin Peaks after a nearly 25-year gap, which rekindled our interests. And I had some free time and some energy, and I started a small podcast looking into some of the, mysteries and unanswered questions and sort of stuff around Twin Peaks. And that's how I found this. I did an episode looking into the origins of the Twin Peaks pilot. And there had been 2 or 3 over the years quotes from Mark Frost, the co-creator of Twin Peaks with David Lynch, about this story that he had heard from his grandmother when he was a boy. up in upstate New York. And it was the girl whose dead body was found by the pond. If you're familiar with Twin Peaks, it's the start of the Laura Palmer story. And that was, for Mark Frost, half of the duo who created Twin Peaks, his kind of inspiration into the story. So looking into that, this was just a brief anecdote for the podcast. I spent some time digging a little deeper to see if this actually was a real thing. He had kind of cast it almost as a ghost story that his grandmother would scare him with. So to kind of find out if this was a real case and actually happened, just did some Googling like you can do nowadays on the internet. And the key thing really was why this hadn't been covered before. Everything comes out around shows like Star Wars and Star Trek, Twin Peaks, so forth, is that Mark Frost had gotten the name wrong. He said the girl's name was Hazel Gray, and in fact, it was Hazel Drew. So once we kind of got around that, we discovered there was a real case in 1908, and it was big news at the time. It was headlines for weeks on end. So that got me looking into it. I was doing a podcast on it, and then at the same time, David, who I can pass off to, he was also looking into this for a book he was working on.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the Hazel Drew part of it, it was that I was researching and writing a book called Twin Peaks FAQ, and it too was sort of timed to the return of the show on Showtime. And I didn't have a lot of time to delve into Hazel, but I kept it in the back of my mind. And then I was listening to Mark's podcast. It's just such an tantalizing story, this sort of unsolved murder that helped inspire this groundbreaking TV show. So that was, and then I just reached out to Mark and said, would you be interested in writing a book about this? And he said he would, and that's how we got together. We didn't know each other until this book.
Oh, okay, that's so cool. So, Mark, what was your podcast?
Well, like I said, it was when the third season of Twin Peaks was coming back, so I was kind of like amping up for it.
Yeah.
So I was looking back at the old Twin Peaks, which kind of ended abruptly and on a cliffhanger and all that. And if you know anything about Twin Peaks, it's all about, hidden messages and allegories, secret inspirations and all that. So my podcast, a lot of podcasts will just kind of go through the episodes one by one and talk to them. I kind of would dive into areas like this, specifically different inspirations for the show, and it's kind of unresolved things getting ready for the third season. The podcast has been dormant. I think it was really, my energy was kind of building up to the show. And then once I got involved with David on this, my energy kind of shifted to the Hazel Drew story. We have been threatening to kind of bring the podcast back in a new form in association with this story. Actually, over the last 5 or 6 years, we had a number of interviews and roundtables and all kinds of interesting discussions that we used for the book. But, in their kind of raw form, we thought they're kind of interesting in and of themselves to get to know the characters and kind of join along in the investigation. Not everything in these interviews made it to the book. We tried to, we had to cut stuff to stick to the narrative. So there's a chance that Dear Meadow Radio could be returning. That's the podcast that, from my end, where this all came from.
So, okay, the podcast name is Dear Meadow Radio.
Dear Meadow Radio. Dear Meadow in Twin Peaks, in the Fire Walk with Me movie, is kind of like a parallel town that's like Twin Peaks, but not as good. So it's just a little joke on their radio station. That was the joke.
I love it. And okay, and David, you were listening to Dear Meadow Radio, and you were a fan of Twin Peaks, and that's what motivated you to reach out to Mark. And when did you two decide this was the right thing to do? Let's get together and write a book. Do you have the background there in writing true crime books?
I've not written any true crime books. I've written other books, about TV. So there was that, and it was pretty easy. I think I just contacted Mark through Twitter or something, and he just said yes. But I guess the larger question is, when did we realize that we had a book? And I can't remember the actual answer to that question. And I don't know if there was some.
Well, David, if I'm remembering correctly, when you called and introduced me, that was your suggestion. Do you want to write a book about this? So that's my memory of it.
terms of our research, do you remember when we sort of had an epiphany that this actually will work?
I mean, my memory is even early explorations, it just seemed like there was so much there. Like we didn't know what the end result would be, but just pulling the newspapers day by day, every day had a new twist and a turn you could look into, and was interesting enough from, that, and it all added up to this whole that there was always like, let's get this story out there after we figure out what the story is, I think. I mean, like I said, you were, maybe in your mind, you were more testing the waters, but I kind of remember when you called saying, would you be interested in writing a book? Like I said, I naively was almost like, well, oh man, this is a great movie or a TV show or something, like, wasn't even necessarily thinking of a book. And then that seemed like a more realistic option. So pretty early on.
It's nearly a perfect book for a true crime fan with all of the elements that go into it. I'm actually really surprised that you fit all of those things in there and made it so cohesive, considering that you had to leave some of the elements out. Like there's so much, it's so dense and so followable too, because sometimes people will take on these true crime cases and they'll just try to pile it all in, and it's just like, I can't keep, you can't keep the name straight sometimes, and it just gets to be too much, and you're trying to actually like follow clues and details, and as all of our listeners are true crime fans, they all want to untangle a knot. Like this is the murder of Hazel Drew is like this knot that they need to untangle, or the murder of fill in the blank, or the disappearance of fill in the blank. Like everyone wants to figure it out, and the way you two laid out all of the characters and the clues and the theories is perfectly done. So well done on that. I know I sound like I'm just like fangirling right now, but it is like impressive to see two people come together who didn't have a history of working together prior or writing true crime books and assemble this. So well done. I do want to break down the actual murder, but real quick, is it not lost on the two of you that you're both named David and Mark respectively? Yeah. Did that? When did you guys say like, well, that's odd?
I don't think we did we, Mark? But I mean, I always, it was always in my head. I always
pretty early up too, I'm sure.
Yeah. It is funny. It's very funny. Yeah.
Like, what isn't that just like the most Twin Peaks-ish thing about the whole thing? Is that?
Yeah, and I think there was other Davids and Bobs we kept running into, or Davids and Marks. I'm sorry, and then there was Bob, Bob the Killer, Bob the Historian, all kinds of Twin Peaks things. We tried to not, we are Twin Peaks fans. We tried to let the story, we tried not to like have that take over the story in any way, because the story in and of itself really stood on its own, we thought. But if you are a Twin Peaks fan and you read it, you're going to see all kinds of parallels, and, it's like a parallel universe story almost to Laura Palmer.
At one point, we were looking at the possibility of a serial killer. So, I mean, I don't know, Mark, if you remember this or if it was mostly me who was doing this, but so we were looking at murders in the vicinity of Sand Lake around the same time. And believe it or not, I found one where, if I'm remembering correctly, the detective was named Cooper and the funeral home or something was called Lynch. And I remember I really wanted to get that in, and Mark, I don't know if you remember this, but you told me you thought it was too much of a stretch to bring that.
I don't remember it, so yes, that makes sense. Then
to bring that murder in, because it clearly had nothing to do
to bring it into the story.
Yeah, but it was still really strange. So there were constantly things like that. Yeah.
What's equally fun about the way you tell this story is it starts off with the foreword by Mark Frost, and as you approach this book, as you first like open it and you start reading it, you're looking for those parallels to Twin Peaks, but very soon you start to forget that it was that Twin Peaks inspired it, because the mystery is so like captivating. You guys have probably broken this down numerous times, and you probably have a rhythm to how you do this, but however you want to explain without giving away any spoilers, the murder of Hazel Drew, feel free, and whoever wants to start, go ahead. But like a synopsis on her murder and just like all of those elements.
Sure. On July, this is July of 1908. And on that Friday, which was, I think, July 3rd, Hazel was really excited about a planned weekend trip. She had gotten the weekend off and she was going to go to Lake George. And she was so excited that she actually waited at her dressmaker's house while her dressmaker made her a blouse so that she could wear it. She wanted to look good in Lake George. It turns out that the next day, and I don't know, I guess it happened sometime the next day, that her aunt, Minnie, who's like one of her best friends, and this really cantankerous, cranky woman, talked her out of going to Lake George and instead they went to Schenectady, which was upstate New York near Sand Lake. And they spent the weekend there. They come back at around, they get back at Sand Lake. They spent the weekend with cousins. They get back around 10 o'clock on Sunday night. They take the trolley car back, and Hazel gets off first, and then Minnie gets off. And the next morning, Hazel's like in the backyard of the house, the Carey house where she worked. And Mrs. Carey comes to her and says, I need you to do the laundry. And Hazel not only says no, but she says, and I quit. So if you believe everybody in Hazel's circle, and Mark will have slightly different takes on some of this, but if you believe everyone in Hazel's circle, there was no forewarning that she was going to quit. It was just something that shocked everybody, including Mrs. Carey. She goes to Minnie's house to drop something off. Minnie later says that she didn't talk to her about her quitting. She didn't know that she quit. She didn't ask her why she was there on a Monday morning during the workday. Hazel tells her she's going across the Hudson River to a town called Watervilliet, which I always mispronounce, and I probably just did again. But that's the last that Minnie sees of her, heading toward that trolley to go over there. Police looked in when Hazel, after they found the body, they went over to her friends in that town, and nobody had seen Hazel. So, and yet her father said somebody did see her. So there was contradictory evidence about whether she ever got there, but police don't think she did ever go to Waterville. So where did she go? She was seen in Union Station on Monday, late Monday morning, by two people who know her, and they have conversations with her. And one says, this is like at about noon, let's say, 11:30 noon. One says to her, where are you going? She says, oh, I'm going down the river. And the other one says, well, how far down the river? And Hazel says, I think she either said to New York, or she got interrupted by the fact that her train was leaving and she had to go get the train. An hour later, about an hour later, she's seen back at Union Station. So something happened there, but I believe that was the last sighting on Monday. Right, Mark? The last sighting on Monday was when she came, she placed an order at 1:15 for the Westcott company to pick up her trunk at the house where she had quit working and have it delivered to her parents. So last sighting on Monday was 1:15, confirmed sighting. Nobody knows where she was from 1:15 for the rest of the day and night.
Until that night when she is seen out in the country.
That's Tuesday. That's right. Tuesday. Tuesday, there's I think an unconfirmed sighting of her in town on Tuesday morning, and then again not seen at all again until around 7 o'clock on Tuesday night by some people who were driving past the pond and saw a woman who was almost definitely Hazel, picking raspberries off bushes near the pond. And then at 7:30 that night, she's two men who are on their way into town run into her, one of whom knows her. So it's definitively Hazel. There's huge chunks of time where nobody knows where she was, including Monday night. Like, where did she sleep? Nobody ever stepped forward to say she slept at our house or whatever. So nobody knows where she was during that time. And then between Tuesday at 7:30 when she's seen, and Saturday, right, where Saturday morning when her body is found, nobody saw her. She, nobody reported her missing. So the last time she was seen on Tuesday night, her body's found on Saturday. Nobody reported her missing. Nobody knows how she got to Teal's Pond on Tuesday night or why she went there. What'd I leave out, Mark?
No, that's it. That's the mysterious last weekend when she's like kind of in and out and People are seeing her, but no one really knows what she's up to. She's clearly up to something in this bustle of activity that ends with her quitting in the morning on that Monday. I think that's a good introduction to her last activities, and that's what the investigators were dealing with, trying to fill in these gaps. But really what they, it was the question of who was this woman? She's this girl from the city of Troy, which was this thriving metropolis at the time. She worked as a domestic servant since the age of 14. She moved out of her parents' house and worked for these powerful men in the city of Troy, powerful families, 3 different families. But yet her body is, mysteriously just found out in Sand Lake, about 20 miles outside of Troy, but out kind of in the country area. David led us up to, how she got out there, but no one knows why or what she's doing or anything like that. So, they start to delve into her friends and family and relationships, trying to look for some motives to answer all these questions. And what they find out is, it's just as a complicated person. She's this 20-year-old girl, beautiful, independent, very social and outgoing, like to take trips out of town, very good with her money, apparently, because she's always dressed very nicely and seen around town. They start to get this dual side of her, though. At first, when they're talking to her family and friends, they paint this picture of sort of quiet, stay-at-home, church-going type, not out late or anything like that. Didn't have boyfriends and so forth. But the more they delve into it, she if she didn't have a lot of boyfriends, she certainly had a lot of friends and a lot of different relationships. At one point, it comes out that there was this chest that I think was at her parents' house. They found she had delivered there, and it contained dozens and dozens of postcards and letters usually from men with anonymous, with using only their initials. So that, there's all kinds of questions because they couldn't find a motive. That's kind of the stark thing that, we talked about Twin Peaks. That's the starting point. There's this beautiful young dead girl here. Somebody did really wrong and threw her in a pond. And that's what kicks off Twin Peaks. And that's what kicks off this story or this narrative. And investigators were never able to piece things together on how she got there. Never even really came close. We think we did. There's still questions out there, but I think that's an overview of, what drew us into the case. And really throughout this, the press and the investigators and then us kind of redoing it. That is the central mystery. Who is Hazel Drew? And you find out she had so many of these relationships and friendships. That's really how you discover her. Her Aunt Minnie had this weird relationship with her. Her uncle, Will, who lived out close to the pond where she was found dead, had this very weird relationship with her. So it's all these, different characters that all intersected at Hazel, and somehow in there, her death came about.
I love the way it's presented with the relationship between the investigators and the family and the press, and how especially the investigators trying to balance like what the press knew and what the family knew and what potential suspects. They weren't going to release their names. Can you give like a backstory on how that all played out, like even politically, how they were like the press was influenced by all that?
Yeah, so that became part of it. I think when we discuss this, sometimes we talk about this from our perspective. There were kind of two different things going on. At first, we were trying to get down the story from the time, the 2.5 weeks that it was in the press. It was in dozens and dozens of newspaper articles. Many of them, or newspapers covered it. Many of them unique coverage. There's some, like United or Associated Press, where it's just a repeat of the facts, but then you would find this new sort of strain with all kinds of new little facts, maybe not solving the murder, but adding things. So this initial, I think that's what you're talking about, the investigators at the time, the press played a big role. It was kind of like the birth of the press in a way, or the popular press. We go into that a little bit about the book, and, because that was going on at the time, it was kind of like the first tabloid yellow journalism was coming around in this case. So some of the articles that you would read, you had to bear that in mind. They might have some different facts that were interesting, but were they, there were some inaccuracies there too that you had to consider. So for this first kind of phase of, just documenting everything, you're kind of just getting the facts at the time. When we now had the baseline or the basic story and it ended with them not solving the case, we had to move on and look beyond that. And when we did that, part of that is looking back at the investigators and what they did and didn't do. And then we start, looking at the investigators. I alluded to it, but there was local papers from Troy that were very good, because they kind of already knew their backyard and were good at the facts. Whereas these tabloids from New York City would come in and, just kind of, raise muck and would bring up new facts. But, you had to kind of be careful, they'd get names spelled wrong and all kinds of things wrong. If that was kind of your original question, it wasn't just, or I guess 100 years later, it was kind of layers of a puzzle that you're bringing in all these facts from different areas from the original investigation, which failed. So what did they do wrong? What questions didn't they ask? And kind of the same thing with the press, which was in a way running its own parallel investigation and judging the initial investigation.
Yeah, you did have the whole yellow journalism thing going on, but also if you read about the history of the press, which I did as I was writing this, they supposedly the era of partisan press had already ended, and we had come across a more conscientious press. But if you immerse yourself in the story of Hazel Drew, you'll see that that's clearly not true, because Troy had certain papers who were very Republican leaning and certain papers who were very Democratic leaning, and the papers that were Republican leaning were very protective of the investigation because Jarvis O'Brien, the district attorney who led it, was a very popular Republican politician, and the Democratic papers were much harsher on the investigation than the Republicans. So there was a lot of that going on at the time.
Yeah, and I think that is really fascinating that the two of you were able to dig that deep into this mystery and get all of those elements in place. Not only like the murder, but the Republican-owned newspapers, the Democratically owned newspapers, who was running for election, who won, who lost, and how that even ties into the story. You were already coming in over 100 years later. Where do you even start when you're doing an independent investigation on something so old?
Well, we started really in two places, and one was the Troy Library, which had all of the old Troy papers, and there were a lot of them. There were like 4 different papers, or they didn't have them all, but they had enough for us to get a sense of the different types of how much coverage there was and how the coverage varied from paper to paper or ownership to ownership. And there was that, and that was a really good place to start, and that led us in all sorts of directions. And then the other thing was Bob Moore, who's the town historian in Sand Lake. He arranged for us to meet with people who were longtime residents up there. We talked to some of the ancestors of people who were sort of tangentially involved in the I mentioned Hazel spent the weekend in Schenectady with her cousins. We spoke to her cousins' ancestors, whatever the opposite of ancestor is, descendants, who said, if they had known about this story while their ancestor was alive, they would have been able to ask her, what was Hazel like that weekend? Talk about, was there something on her mind? But they didn't know about it. So they missed that opportunity because she passed away. So, but Bob Moore gave us some tours. He set up roundtable discussions. He introduced us to a guy by the name of Mark Marshall, who basically was like an investigator for us. He really got immersed in this crime and is a great researcher and came up with so much stuff. He turns out he lives on the grounds where the foundation of the church that Hazel's family attended is still there. So he felt some sort of personal connection to it, but he did amazing work. And so interview, that's what got us started. And then all these things sort of, you come across all these different things. And And then that takes you in new directions, you know? So by the end, we're not just looking at the newspapers during those 2.5 weeks, but, you know, you want to look through the newspapers because you might come across the name of one of the people who were involved, or you might have to go back 8 years to look at an election, or you might look at there was some discussion about what sort of medicine. They found pink lozenges in her room, or at least William Clemens did. And what could that have been? And then you start looking at all the crazy ads that the papers were running about all these miracle cures and things like that. So it just sort of veers off in all these directions. And, you know, Mark in particular, if I can speak for him, we started to call these rabbit holes, and it was really, really easy to get lost in them, you know, because it's just so fascinating what you're finding.
Yeah. David covered it pretty well there. It was pretty cool. It was like when we would go up there to Sand Lake, which we went numerous times. It was almost like a little community up there. Like, even if we weren't writing the book, I think these, you know, there were kind of these amateur detectives, Mark and Bob. There was Ralph and Priscilla, this brother and sister, who would always seemingly, every time we went up there, drive us over, you know, around the scene, across the mountain and so forth. And it just helped us immerse us in the case too, and kind of help motivate us and be able to add some additional texture. So yeah, and then in terms of research, I always say, like, if, you know, we didn't live in this time with the internet and stuff, I don't think we could have uncovered, you know, half of this stuff that we did. We did go to the library and make photocopies and stuff when we had to, but using newspapers.com, ancestry.com, I have, you know, a dozen or maybe 24 different family trees on my ancestry.com account for different characters, and when we wanted to know more information about them. So it's, you know, amazing the things that are at your fingertip on the internet these days. There was, because our case took place in upstate New York, there's this one guy, I can't think of the name of the site right now, but just kind of a guy who for years has been scanning, he going around to local libraries in New York, upstate New York, and just scanning old newspapers for his own site. So it's, you know, the site's crashes and all that sometimes, but it's an amazing resource for not just, like David said, especially like I think I was saying earlier, it was kind of two phases, using the articles and the original articles that were printed when the case was active, but then, you know, so many rabbit holes, as David said, trying to find out if you thought this guy might have been involved in the murder, then Googling, you know, and some of these people were prominent people. Her 3 employers were all very prominent men. 2 of them had run for mayor. One was the city engineer. Another was city treasurer. So you can find things out about them, just going back, and who their friends were and who their associates were and what kind of things they were involved with. Did they have scandals in their background that, you know, may have gotten them into some kind of trouble? And we found lots of evidence about that, and kind of speculated how that might have contributed to Hazel's death. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, and really a combination of on the internet, just spending hours Googling and these different sites. And then what I really think helped our book a lot was being able to go up there, spend time up there, walk around. You know, we spent time at the pond, and I think David and I both have sort of geographic and spatial limitations. So being able to go up there and not just read about the dimensions and so forth, and see where the body was and all that kind of stuff was very, very helpful. And the people up there were, yeah, we can't thank them enough, really.
You mentioned Roger and Pat too. Like they are descendants of the Taylor family, which was the Hazel's mother's family, and they had done genealogy, and that really helped us too. And the other thing that Mark didn't mention was books. I mean, I read books on like upstate New York folklore, and just it's a great book by Jack Casey called the Trial of Batch J, about a political scandal up there in 1896 that wound up having some impact, we think, on the Hazel Drew investigation. So And I know Mark was reading at one point about Teddy Roosevelt and all of the the state politics, and I learned about things like the APA, the American Protective Association, which I never even had heard of before, and it's sort of so resonant in the age of January 6th and Trumpism, I guess you'd call it. But it was just we had to read about. We didn't have to, but it was good that we did, and we loved reading about it. Mame Fay was a very famous prostitute a madam who worked out of Troy, and there was a great documentary by a couple of film writers, one of whom's name I can't forget because it's Penny Lane, called Sitting on a Million, which was really helpful. So there were so many, just absolutely compelling stories that, some of them we couldn't even get in the book because they weren't relevant enough, but we just learned so much. It was so much fun, like Mark said.
And the city of Troy, just walking around there for a variety of reasons, in many ways has, in a lot of places, it's just the same, it's the same architecture and they haven't changed. And so it's like you were immersed in the time. I think there's a new show coming out on HBO called The Gilded Age. And it's all, it's set in New York City, but they always go to Troy when they need something from that time period. So that was really helpful too.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors. And now we're back to the program.
Yeah, that is super cool. And what an amazing experience to have and walk away from, with all of this new stuff. Like you saying you didn't know that some of these things existed. Did you have access to like court transcripts and autopsy reports? And did you work with law enforcement on any level?
Yeah, we were largely unsuccessful in finding any kind of records. We looked a lot and would get different leads and stuff. I remember when I first started, I think it was the county clerk or county registrar's office. I was up there by myself one time and I kind of talked my way into being able to go down into, and it was pretty cool. It was like, they were very uninterested in helping me or showing me around this particular person who was assisting me, not interested in the case at all. So, some people kind of get into it and want to know the details, but this guy was kind of like, unlocked the cage and here it's in there somewhere and pointed, and it was kind of like the Raiders of the Lost Ark warehouse with just files everywhere. And I eventually found, if there was something, where it would have been, and never was able to find something. But in the subsequent years, we talked to all kinds of people about where any records from that time would be today. And there was just a history of fires and floods and things got moved. And I don't think we ever 100% completely eliminated the possibility that they are somewhere, but we were unsuccessful. And we were also hindered by the fact that this never went to trial, or there was never anyone charged or anything like that. So there wouldn't have been court records, which is when I got down in the basement. I think that's what I was looking at to see if there was anything. And there probably wouldn't have been in that case anyway. There was an inquest held, so we had some hope of that, or some case files. And there was at one point, David and I returned to the county clerk's office because they had found something. I don't know if we stirred them up, but they were cleaning and moving things around. And they did find some additional case files that I wouldn't have seen, that he was, from that time period. So we, got in there, they gave us gloves and we were very excited and, put these back. And it was from the maybe 1880s and 1890s. And then there was a gap, and then it was the 1920s, something like that. But our particular run, it was not there from 1908. So that was disappointing. So yeah, we would have loved to. We did eventually, and it ended up being nothing. I can't remember if we got it in time to get it in the book, David, or if we even bothered. But there was all this talk of on the Sand Lake side, out in the country, the coroner or mortuary, where they took her body. There was a descendant that Bob Moore, the historian up there, knew, a descendant of this mortician. who said they had, some sort of records, and we eventually did get it. And it was literally just, from the funeral book or something. And it had her name, Hazel Drew on this date. So it wasn't very helpful in cracking the case. But yeah, if those records ever could somehow be turned up, that would be very, very interesting. We did actually, and I think it was very early on, talk to the district attorney, their office up there. And this was years ago. I remember talking to someone over the phone, and there was some mild interest in, because it's a homicide, it's unsolved, it's still on the case, or it's still on the books. There was some interest, in revisiting the case, but we never really followed up on that. But that would be interesting as well.
Yeah, the inquest was really heavily covered by a bunch of different papers, and we got a lot of. That's the closest we got to any sort of official transcript. They quoted the testimony and the interrogations at length, and that was really helpful to us. But and I had I knew somebody who knew a retired FBI guy who lives up in Averill Park, Sound Lake area, and he sort of volunteered to help us for a while, and we were sort of hoping. And I think he did talk to some people he knew, and they were all just telling him that nothing existed at this point. I mean, we were looking for, like, hey, the dress she was wearing when she was murdered, and any sort of physical evidence whatsoever. The possibility that we might be able to do some DNA testing, and it was just really hard to come up with any sort of official documentation.
Well, as you're researching it and looking into each of these characters, was there any character that, I'm sure there was, that stood out and the two of you were just like having a good time learning about this character?
There's a lot of crazy characters. I mean, her uncle, William Taylor, who lived at a farmhouse near the pond, was just, there was this one story about this guy, about how his wife had, I shouldn't laugh, but his wife had died, and then he tried to take his own life. But at one point, I guess he was lonely, and he went to the farmhouse of one of his neighbors who barely knew him. And he walked in and said something like, "Will you marry me?" And she goes, "No." And he goes, "Okay," and walks out and leaves. So he was a really strange guy, and clearly not high on the chart of social skills. And Minnie was crazy too. I mean, Minnie would bark at the reporters and tell them to stop bothering her, and that she wasn't going to tell them the names of Hazel's friends because she didn't want to get them in trouble. She wouldn't talk to investigators for a long time, and finally one day supposedly they broke her down and she almost collapsed and had to be escorted out the building. So there was that. The one character that I would say, can I speak for both of us, and Mark can also comment on this, the one character I think we had the biggest disagreement about was the head investigator, the DA, Jarvis O'Brien. I guess, Mark, you can tell more about that, but that was probably the one character who we had some different thoughts about. Hazel too, but Jarvis was kind of like somebody we probably got into arguments about. Mark.
Debates, good-natured debates. I back up what David said on his choices there. In terms of Jarvis O'Brien, the lead investigator, we had a difference of opinion, I guess you could say, on how good a job he did with, under his circumstances, and maybe what his motivations might have been. And we, that was a little bit of a challenge we had to come up with something, we had to agree with how we presented him in the book. So it was a bit of if we were doing, it might have been a little bit different perspective, but he was an interesting character. He was kind of on the surface anyway, this, up and comer. David mentioned we did some research at the time, it was kind of the progressive movement. And, he seemingly to me was kind of part of that, aligned with that. So, there's a lot of politics going on, but politics back then was way different. It was still dirty and everything like that. But what we think of as left and right and Democrat and Republican, it was a different thing back then. He was an interesting character.
Just say it was different, but it's also to me, one of the things that's really interesting about it is the way it resonates today. Like you take like O'Brien was a Democrat, like most Irish Catholics were, and then when he went to Troy, because I believe in order to advance his career, he had to be a Republican. He became a Republican, and to me, that's like, Ted. He's not Ted Cruz. Most people are better than Ted Cruz, but Ted Cruz is like Donald Trump is like a psychopath, and then the next thing you know, because his future depends on Donald Trump, that Donald Trump is second coming of God. So there was, I just found that there were like these there was this resonating.
The point I guess I was making, David, was in terms of Republicans and Democrats is it's not the same alignments today. So if the fact that it may look like we're going after a political party has nothing to do with anything. It's right. The like I said, Republicans at the time were this coalition of sort of the WASPs of old, but also this progressive movement of Teddy Roosevelt, these up and comers. The Democrats at the time were had responded to the Republicans being in power for so long, and had kind of taken power with a surge of Irish immigration and so forth. And again, this is all the background stuff we didn't want to like fill the book with, but it was interesting stuff. And David's assessment of Jarvis O'Brien was he came to Troy, became a Republican because for political reasons, but with my research, with the stuff I was looking into, this was a period when that did happen. Longtime people who were Democrats because they were Irish, because there was this progressive movement and both parties had been kind of corrupt for years and years. At this particular time in 1908, it was under Teddy Roosevelt and so forth, but the Republicans were really the ones pushing the progressive movement. Now, there were still old school Republicans holding on to power. So in our research, looking at articles and their, Jarvis O'Brien's campaigns, we looked into them and those kinds of things. And my take on, after looking at all that, was he was part of this kind of progressive movement. David's a little more suspicious about that. But, interesting character. These are all real people and everything.
Yeah, that would be a place that we disagreed because, as it turns out, his law partner or his former law partner or whatever was a big Republican guy. So I would think that he was much more politically motivated than Mark would. And I think that pretty much sums up our difference of thinking about Jarvis is, how pure or politically motivated he was. But Mark said, a really interesting guy from a really interesting family that Mark compares in the book to the Kennedys, which, very accomplished family with a lot of pressure on the younger sibling to do well. And O'Brien had this like really, again, you described him really well physically. He's got this like walrus mustache. Clearly, there was a side to him that was very sort of theatrical.
I always think Kurt Russell in Tombstone as my image of O'Brien.
That's perfect. And I love I wrote that question down before this interview, and I was like, that's going to be such a throwaway question, but it's the answer was great, and we even got a little glimpse of like the healthy debate right there, and which is fascinating to me that two people can come together and write a book like this, have those debates, and be like, okay, well, that was we're just fielding each other's opinion in order to properly showcase what we're talking about, and like you can have a compromise there. And you said that you're pretty sure you solved it, and I'm certainly not going to give away a spoiler here. By the time you do get to the end of the book, everything that you have presented, and then you give your conclusion, it makes a lot of sense. How did the two of you come together to compromise, or was that even debated, or were you guys on the same page when you said, yeah, she did this, and this? And I think what impressed me the most is that you started to look away from the details that were there, and you went to, well, why wasn't this happening? Like, if she wasn't here, why would like you were looking at the holes, and instead of looking at the tangible elements.
the holes instead of the donuts, to use a Twin Peaks analogy. But go ahead, Mark, because I think you took it took a little more convincing of you than it did of me to.
Yeah, well, I don't think we had, by time it was time to write it and everything, I don't think we had much disagreement here, in terms of the facts and stuff, maybe how we presented them or something like that. But I think you're right, Lance, that I don't know, this was our first attempt at this, but we didn't go in with like pet theories, kind of. We just were interested in the story. By the time we knew the story so well, then we wanted to, find out this was real thing. So, there was a real killer and everything that was never revealed. So it was just exactly how you said. It's kind of like the scientific method or something, just asking the questions and using all these resources available, including the community and other people who contributed to this, to just keep asking questions of things that don't make sense. And I don't know, we didn't even really, a lot of the time, talk about, who the killer was. There was always things to look into, always questions surrounding that, from her mysterious timeline, and just tons of questions surrounding Hazel, all of which hopefully would help answer it. So that's the things we were focused on. And then we didn't plan on it, but we ended up spending 5 or 6 years on this. So, just through all that time, certain things fall off and certain things become more important. And, even the things that fall off, we didn't throw them away necessarily. They were still interesting. And, part of this is all the different suspects and all the red herrings and everything. So there's all kinds of, missteps and wrong turns in the book. But for the solution, we tried to get rid of all the stuff that either the investigation we felt, did a pretty convincing job of addressing already and eliminating or what have you. And then we focused on the questions they didn't ask, a basic thing without, again, thank you. We don't want to give hardly anything away about the solution and so forth. But, we noticed fairly early on with all the suspects and characters that the investigation and the press looked at, very little attention was given to her 3 employees that I think I mentioned earlier, all very powerful men, tied into the Republican Party at the time, wealthy and so forth. And, if there was a murder today, a young girl, you just would think the press would be, and she lived with these, she didn't live with her family. She lived with these people's families. So other than, being identified in the paper and maybe a quote or two, they were not a part of the story at all. So, like I said, we were fortunate their lives were part of the national record or, the newspapers of the time. So we were able to look into those areas and then see things would pop up that were, well, wait a second, in terms of we're looking for motivation, different things. And so these kind of abstract questions we would get hits on, and, had Mark Marshall, who we can't thank enough for all the efforts he put into this. That's where we, I guess, methodically got to where we got to at the end. And I really wish we could talk about that last chapter. We've done a couple of these interviews. It's kind of frustrating at this stage anyway. We don't want to give that away because the whole book kind of builds on that as it just kind of laid out. But yeah, I think we didn't have what we came up with in the final chapter, that the sort of area. If you're looking at the whole book, there's all kinds of, her friends out in the country, her romances and, her employers, whatever. But the area that we kind of focused on in the solution that we think was the pivotal piece was not a thing I initially, the first couple of years, I kind of scoffed at it, actually, that it was too, I'm like, come on, you're just trying to sell a book or something. But it turned out to look very plausible the closer we looked at it. So, I don't think David and I have large disagreements on that aspect of the book. We might about Jarvis O'Brien and a few other areas. But yeah, we kept an open mind. We never wanted to like, oh, this is the solution and let's build the book around that. It was definitely the other way around. The solution chapter came, I think, very late in the day, I guess, in terms of not just writing, but really thinking about and putting everything down.
Well, I feel like if I talk any longer about it, I will end up slipping and giving something away. Thank goodness that this is not a live program and we can just edit it out. But I just have a couple more questions. One of my questions is unrelated to this. David, you are an author of other books, one of them being Conversations with Mark Frost, which I'll admit I have not read yet, but I plan to. What's he like? I'm sorry to just like geek for a second, but this is as close as I'm going to get to Mark Frost, probably.
In a platonic way, I love Mark Frost. I think he's really, really smart, really, really generous. I think he's, one time I said to him, everyone calls David Lynch a surrealist. What term do you think would best describe you? And he said humanist. And I think his values are just so admirable. And, and I've read, I've not just seen a lot of Mark's TV work, but I've read his prose. In fact, for this book, The Conversations with Mark Frost, I read everything that he'd written. And even if you read our foreword, I think our foreword is so good. I couldn't have asked for a better foreword. And I think it's just so beautifully written. So I'm kind of like fangirling here myself, but, he's just, he's really smart and really strong values and just a really interesting guy. And I'm so glad, that I got to know him.
That's awesome. And for the both of you, what were your thoughts on season 3?
I was a big fan. I thought it was great. I tried to go in, even though we did a podcast speculating on this and that. I'm not one to kind of speculate on what they're actually, whatever they give me. I tried to not have expectations, I guess. And I figured it wasn't going to be like the original 2 seasons. So it was not. If you go and look at David Lynch's most recent stuff like Inland Empire, I was thinking it would be a little more like that, darker and colder and a little more sterile. And it was. So I enjoy that too. I enjoyed the old stuff, but I thought it was, I don't know. I don't know if that's Monday morning quarterbacking, but if it was closer to the first 2 seasons, I don't know. It might not have, might have seemed a little like The Force Awakens or, something like that. So I'm glad they did something different. And I thought it was really good.
I feel like you're asking me like I'm like Ron DeSantis answering if I've been vaccinated or not, but because I'm sort of avoiding the question, but because I think I haven't watched it since it aired, since it was originally on, and I'm not sort of dying to do that either. But certainly I thought it was really interesting and captivating when it was going on. I think. I'm a big fan of Lost Highway, and I've seen Inland Empire probably 5 or 6 times. I don't have any problem with that. I guess I do wish that, I don't know. I thought, I missed some things about the old Twin Peaks, but I also thought the new one was great. And I also think, and I asked Mark Frost about this, I thought that there was some retro fitting, or there was some things that happened in like the whole thing with Sarah Palmer and the frog moth, Mark called it. So many people saw Sarah one way during the course of the first 2 seasons and Fire Walk with Me as this woman who was kind of in this really difficult situation and where the man she loved was abusing her daughter, and that she knew about it and just refused to acknowledge it. But then all of a sudden, now she's been possessed by a demon since like the 1950s, or maybe it was a latent demon. I don't know. But, I felt like Mark, there were things that were difficult to get him to comment on. And I think partly that's because we talked about this, Twin Peaks was not one person's vision, and he's, he always, people would point out like mistakes and stuff, and he would say there's more than one canon, and that would really upset people. But David Lynch goes off and makes Fire Walk with Me or parts of The Return, or throws out part of the script of the season 2 finale, and nobody's like up in arms about that. So I think that their visions were slightly different, and that I do believe there is more than one canon to Twin Peaks. I think even though as a fan that kind of bothers me, I think we just have to accept it. So there were things that I think veered away from what we had come to know or expect or learn. But I think that's just one of the idiosyncrasies of Twin Peaks, is that there's never going to be one universe where everything fits right into place.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, it's a hybrid of what the two of you said. I watched it, the season in its entirety one time, and I was like, this is awful. And then as the days went on, it just wouldn't leave. Like it kept like popping in my head. It got under my skin, and I was like, "No, there's something else there." And that's the way it is with a lot of the things that David Lynch and Mark Frost create. Like it's all wrapped up in something else. So I was like, I got to do it again. So I went back, and I think maybe 10 minutes into the first episode, I was like, "This is brilliant. This is absolutely brilliant." And I've seen the season like probably 3. I think I just started like watching random episodes the other day just because I was like, oh, I got to see that episode again because it's so good. I mean, there's some stuff that's like truly mind-boggling, but even that is like, well, I'm having a good time trying to figure this out. Like, where were their heads at with this? But really, I loved the end of it. I loved the end of it.
Yeah.
I don't know how else they could end it, something like that, where it's, well, what the hell happened? Who knows? But
yeah, like,
that's how it leaves you. Yeah,
like it's going to end too, because like the time frame is coming to an end, and the whole time you're like, "Don't you do this to me? Don't you do that?" And then they do, and it goes exactly where you didn't want it to go, but you wanted it to go there, and then it was like, damn. But it's totally fulfilling.
Yeah. I still kind of I don't think they'll do anything, but I think David Lynch will do something. You know, he had that like Wisteria Lane or something in development, and it had a lot of the same people. I don't know. I think he doesn't, in terms of like the modern era of the MCU and expanded universe. I think he's got in his head, all his stuff is kind of connected. Like if you watch Inland Empire and Lost Highway and so forth, it seems like some of those characters, were buddies with each other from the lodges and all that. So I don't know, and how it ended was kind of like the Twin Peaks universe was dead or something in a way. So, he could take a couple actors, that's them. I don't know. I think we'll see something weird come out of it, but probably not season 4.
And Laura is not dead. So.
Well, yeah, that's what they say. But who can you trust there? I don't know.
It's fantastic. Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. I really, really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this. The book is Murder at Teal's Pond. I can't recommend it enough. You guys are great at what you do. There's the book right there. Yeah. Great at what you do. David Bushman and Mark Evans. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lance.